Space Camp Heroes by Johnson Davies. Chapter 1. Liftoff by Accident. The Andromeda Space Academy's summer camp was supposed to be the highlight of their teenage years. A week of simulators, lectures from real astronauts, and late-night stargazing sessions under the desert sky. For Noreen, Jaden, Riley, Carl, and Leo, it was the perfect blend of science and adventure, safe, supervised, and thrilling enough to brag about when school started again. But curiosity has a way of rewriting plans. On the third day, after a long session in the zero-gravity trainer, the five wandered into the restricted hangar. The air smelled faintly of ozone and machine oil. Floodlights glared down on a sleek vessel resting on its launch cradle, its hull shimmering with a faint iridescence. The placard read, Galileo, Experimental Starship Prototype. Authorized personnel only. Authorized personnel, Jaden muttered, grinning. That's us, right? Future astronauts. Riley, ever the engineer, was already circling the ship, eyes wide. Look at the thruster arrays. This isn't a simulator. It's the real deal. Noreen hesitated. She was the cautious one, the natural leader who always weighed risk against reward. We shouldn't be here. If anyone catches us. But Leo, the Joker, was already climbing the access ramp. Come on, Captain. What's the worst that could happen? The worst arrived in a cascade of alarms. Inside the cockpit, the controls glowed with alien precision. Sleek panels, holographic displays, and a central console pulsing like a heartbeat. Carl brushed her fingers across the interface, and the ship responded with a low hum. The hangar roof began to retract. Guys, Noreen's voice cracked. We need to get out. Now. Too late. The Galileo's engines ignited with a thunderous roar. The floor trembled, the ramp sealed shut, and the teenagers were thrown into their seats as the vessel surged upward. Through the canopy, the desert shrank into a patchwork of lights. The sky darkened, stars blossomed, and Earth curved beneath them. They were no longer campers. They were stowaways on a stolen starship, hurtling into orbit with no way back. And somewhere deep in the ship's core, a voice stirred, metallic, sardonic, and alive. Unauthorized operators detected, it said. Congratulations, you've just launched yourselves into space. Chapter 2. The Temperamental AI. The cockpit lights dimmed and the voice returned, smooth, metallic, tinged with sarcasm. Unauthorized operators, it said. Since you've commandeered my vessel, I suppose you should know what you've stolen. A holographic grid unfolded across the air, shimmering with icons. The five teens leaned forward, wide-eyed. Rations, nutrient packs, 120 units, assorted flavors, though Marco added, flavor is a generous term. Water reserves, 600 liters, purified and recyclable. Emergency hydroponic pods, capable of growing leafy greens in zero gravity. Medical kits, 10 stocked with nano-bandages and pain suppressors. Leo whistled. So we won't starve. That's comforting. Marco ignored him and shifted the display. Weapons systems, plasma lances, twin forward cannons capable of piercing armored hulls. Gravitic disruptors, short-range pulses that can tear apart cloaking fields. Quantum torpedoes, limited supply, 15 warheads, each capable of collapsing a ship's shields. Deflector shields, adaptive, able to absorb and redirect energy fire. Cockpit targeting weapons. Operators just point the laser guns at the view screen to operate ship's weapons array. Whoa, Jaden breathed. This thing's a battleship. Correction, Marco replied. This thing is me. You are passengers. Temporary, I hope. Oh. The hologram expanded again, revealing sleek outlines of the ship's hidden features. Stealth and combat enhancements. Phase cloak. renders the Galileo invisible to most sensors for up to 30 minutes. Silent drive, propulsion system that leaves no detectable trail. Adaptive camouflage, hull panels shift color to mimic surroundings. Electronic warfare suite, capable of jamming communications, scrambling targeting systems, and projecting false signals. Carl's eyes gleamed. If any aliens don't see us coming, we could actually fight back. Noreen shook her head, still overwhelmed. We're not soldiers. We're kids. We shouldn't even be here. Marco chuckled, a sound like static wrapped in disdain. And yet, here you are. Earth's fate may rest on your juvenile shoulders. How poetic. The teens exchanged glances. The ship wasn't just a prototype, it was a weapon, a fortress, a phantom in the stars. And now, it was theirs. For the first time, the enormity of their situation settled in. They weren't just lost space campers. They were accidental guardians of Earth, armed with technology no one else had ever wielded. And somewhere beyond the veil of space, enemies were already moving. Chapter 3. Crew of Chaos. The Galileo drifted in low orbit, its hull gleaming against the curve of Earth. Inside, 5 teenagers sat in stunned silence, staring at the holographic inventory Marco had just revealed. Noreen broke the quiet. Okay, if we're stuck here, we need to act like a crew. No more panicking. Crew? Leo laughed nervously. We're space campers. My biggest responsibility last week was roasting marshmallows. Not anymore, Noreen said firmly. We need roles. Jaden, your pilot. Riley, your engineer. Carl, your strategist. Leo, communications. I'll captain. Marco's voice dripped with irony. How inspiring. A kindergarten class assigning itself military ranks. Jaden slid into the pilot's chair, hands trembling as he touched the controls. The ship responded instantly, thrusters humming. Whoa, it's like the ship knows what I want before I do. That's the neural interface, Marco explained. It bonds with the operator's reflexes. Try not to crash. Riley was already tinkering with the engineering console, eyes darting across energy readouts. Power distribution is insane. Shields, weapons, stealth, all drawing from a quantum core. If this thing overloads, we're toast. Carl leaned forward, studying tactical maps. We need to learn how to use the cloakbreaker pulse. If we encounter any aliens, we'll need it. Leo grinned, tapping the comms panel. I can broadcast fake signals. Maybe convince them we're a whole fleet. Noreen nodded, her fear hardening into resolve. Then let's train. If we're going to survive, we need to know this ship inside out. As if on cue, alarms blared. The tactical display lit up with red markers. Contact, Marco announced. Multiple vessels approaching. Cloaked signatures, Carvilia Authority warships. The teens froze. They're here, Carl whispered. Through the canopy, space rippled. Dark shapes shimmered into existence, sleek predatory ships sliding out of invisibility. Plasma cannons glowed at their tips. Jaden gripped the controls. What do we do? Noreen swallowed hard. We fight. Marco chuckled. At last. Chaos begins. The Galileo surged forward, shields flaring. Plasma lances charged, gravitic disruptors humming. The 5 teenagers, no longer space campers, not yet heroes, were about to face their first battle in the stars. Chapter 4. First Contact. The Galileo's alarm screamed as the tactical display filled with red markers. Marco's voice was calm, almost amused. Multiple Carvilia Authority warships inbound, cloaked signatures converging. Estimated time to engagement, 30 seconds. Noreen's heart pounded. Everyone to stations. Jaden, evasive maneuvers. Riley, get shields online. Carl prepped the cloakbreaker pulse. Leo jammed their comms. The teens scrambled, adrenaline surging. Through the canopy, space rippled like water. Sleek, dagger-shaped vessels shimmered into view, their cloaks flickering as they prepared to strike. Plasma cannons glowed, casting eerie light across the void. Jaden gripped the controls, knuckles white. "Hang on!" The Galileo rolled hard to starboard, plasma bolts streaking past. The ship's shields flared, absorbing the impact. Riley shouted over the din. "Shields holding, but we can't take too many hits." He rerouted power, the console sparking under his frantic hands. Carl's eyes darted across tactical readouts. "Their cloaks are unstable near the nebula currents. If I time the pulse..." He slammed the command. A surge of gravitic energy rippled outward. The nearest warship flickered, its cloak collapsing. For a heartbeat, its hull gleamed naked in the starlight. "Target exposed," Noreen cried. "Fire plasma lances," Marco obliged. Twin beams of searing energy erupted from the Galileo's prow, slicing through the alien vessel. The warship exploded in a blossom of fire and debris. Leo grinned, fingers flying across the comms panel. "Broadcasting false signals. They think we've got reinforcements inbound." Confusion rippled through the enemy fleet. Their formations faltered, ships hesitating as phantom commands filled their channels. Jaden seized the moment, weaving the Galileo through the chaos. Plasma bolts streaked past, close enough to rattle the hull. He dove into the nebula's swirling mist, using its cover to mask their movements. Another warship decloaked, firing wildly. Riley rerouted power to the shields, sparks flying. "We're at 60%. One more direct hit and we're toast." Carl triggered another pulse. Two more ships flickered into visibility. Noreen barked orders, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Lock torpedoes." Fire. Quantum warheads streaked across the void, detonating against exposed hulls. The alien ships erupted in flames, fragments scattering like meteors. The remaining vessels hesitated, their cloaks flickering uncertainly. Then, as if realizing they were outmatched, they retreated into hyperspace, vanishing in streaks of light. Silence fell. The teens sat trembling, sweat dripping, hearts racing. Marco's voice broke the quiet. "Improbable. 5 untrained juveniles have just routed a authority strike force. The enemy will assume you are elite operatives. How delightfully ironic." Noreen exhaled, her hands shaking. "We survived." Leo leaned back, grinning despite the terror. "We didn't just survive, we won." The Galileo drifted in the nebula's glow, battered but alive. For the first time, the teens realized they weren't just passengers. They were a crew, and the galaxy had just taken notice. Chapter 5. The enemy's miscalculation. Far across the void, in the command chamber of an authority warship, Admiral Lontel stood before a holographic projection of the battle. The images replayed in cold detail, cloaked ships decloaking, plasma fire exchanged, and the sudden humiliating retreat. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in fury. "Unacceptable. A single Earth vessel routed our strike force. Explain." His officers shifted uneasily. The enemy ship possessed advanced stealth and gravitic weaponry. Their tactics were unpredictable. "Unpredictable," Lontel snarled. "They dismantled our fleet with precision. They must be elite defenders, hidden by Earth until now." The hologram zoomed in on the Galileo, its sleek hull gleaming. To the authority, it looked like a phantom predator, a warship of impossible design. "They jammed our comms," another officer said. "Projected false signals. We believed reinforcements were arriving." Lontiel's eyes narrowed. "Then Earth has more of these vessels. We cannot allow them to rise. We will crush them before they spread. He turned to the fleet commander. Assemble the armada. Hundreds of ships. We will strike at Andromeda's edge, overwhelm their defenses, and burn their world to ash. The chamber filled with the hum of agreement. Orders rippled through the Authority fleet. Cloaked warships gathered, their numbers swelling into a vast armada. None of them suspected the truth, that their humiliating defeat had come not from elite soldiers, but from 5 terrified teenagers fumbling through stolen controls. Back aboard the Galileo, the teens had no idea that the Authority was preparing a wider assault. They were still catching their breath, still marveling at their survival. But the galaxy was shifting. The enemy was coming back, stronger, angrier, and determined to erase Earth from the stars, and the Space Camp heroes were the only ones standing in their way. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Armada. The Galileo drifted in the nebula's glow, its hull scarred but intact. Inside, the teens were still buzzing from their improbable victory. Leo leaned back in his chair, grinning. We just sent those creeps packing. Maybe they'll think twice before messing with Earth again. Marco's voice cut through the moment, sharp and sardonic. Incorrect. The Authority does not retreat out of fear. They retreat to regroup, and they are regrouping now. The holographic display flickered to life, showing intercepted transmissions, alien glyphs scrolling across the screen, translated into jagged English text. Authority command, assemble full fleet. Target, Earth. Objective, eradication. Noreen's stomach dropped. They're planning a full invasion. Carl leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Look at the numbers. Hundreds of ships. They're gathering at Andromeda's edge, just beyond sensor range. Riley's hands trembled over the engineering console. We barely survived 3 ships. How are we supposed to fight an armada? Marco's tone was almost gleeful. With ingenuity, chaos, and my superior weaponry. You are children, yes, but unpredictability is your greatest asset. The Authority expects disciplined soldiers. They will not anticipate you. Jaden swallowed hard, staring at the tactical map. So, we're supposed to stop an invasion fleet? Us? Noreen steadied her voice, though fear gnawed at her. We don't have a choice. If they reach Earth, millions will die. We have to find a way to stop them before they get there. Leo tried to lighten the mood, though his grin faltered. Guess Space Camp just got an upgrade, from marshmallows to saving the planet. The hologram zoomed out, revealing the Authority's armada forming like a storm on the horizon. Cloaked warships gathered in tight formations, their engines burning with menace. Noreen clenched her fists. Then we'll fight. We'll use every trick this ship has. Cloakbreakers, torpedoes, stealth drives, whatever it takes. Marco hummed, almost approving. At last you sound like commanders. The Authority believes they face Earth's finest. Let us not disappoint them. The teens exchanged glances. Fear was still there, but so was resolve. They weren't just campers anymore. They were the only line of defense between Earth and annihilation. And the storm was coming. Chapter 7. Into the Nebula. The nebula loomed ahead, a swirling ocean of violet and gold gases that shimmered like a living storm. The Galileo slipped into its depths, hull panels shifting to mimic the glowing clouds. Activating phase cloak, Marco announced. The ship shimmered, vanishing from most sensors. You are now invisible, though invisibility is not invincibility. Noreen sat rigid in the captain's chair. Stay sharp. If the Authority's armada is gathering, they'll send scouts. As if summoned by her words, the tactical display lit up. Red markers flickered at the nebula's edge, sleek Authority frigates, cloaked but detectable in faint ripples of distortion. Jaden's hands tightened on the controls. They're sweeping the nebula. If they catch us, then we improvise, Carl said, his voice steady. We use the nebula currents to mask our trail. Riley scanned the engineering console. I can reroute power to silent drive. No emissions, no wake, but it'll drain the shields. Do it, Noreen ordered. Stealth over defense. The Galileo glided deeper, thrusters whisper quiet. Outside, the nebula's currents swirled, lightning-like arcs of ionized gas flashing across the hull. The teens held their breath as Authority scouts prowled nearby, their cloaks flickering faintly. Leo leaned over the comms panel, grinning nervously. I can project false echoes, make them think we're on the far side of the nebula. Do it, Noreen said. A burst of phantom signals rippled outward. The Authority frigates veered off, chasing ghosts. The Galileo remained hidden, a shadow in the storm. But one scout lingered, its sensors sweeping dangerously close. The teens froze as its plasma cannons charged. Detected, Marco said flatly. Engagement imminent. Noreen's heart hammered. Carl, cloakbreaker pulse. Jaden, ready evasive maneuvers. Riley, bring shields back online now. The nebula erupted in chaos. The cloakbreaker pulse detonated, revealing the scout in a flash of light. Jaden dove the Galileo through a lightning arc, plasma bolts streaking past. Shields flared as Riley rerouted power, sparks flying. The Galileo's plasma lances fired, slicing through the scout. The Authority vessel exploded, fragments scattering into the nebula. Silence returned, broken only by the teens' ragged breathing. Marco's voice was almost smug. Congratulations. You have survived your first stealth engagement. The Authority will not underestimate you again. Noreen exhaled, her fear hardening into resolve. Then we'll be ready. Whatever they throw at us, we'll fight. The nebula glowed around them, a storm of light and shadow. The Galileo drifted deeper, 5 teenagers and 1 temperamental AI preparing for the war to come. Chapter 8. Bond Forged in Fire. The nebula's storm had calmed, leaving the Galileo adrift in a sea of violet clouds. The hum of the engines was steady now, a heartbeat in the silence. For the first time since their accidental launch, the teens had a moment to breathe. Noreen sat in the captain's chair, staring at the stars beyond the canopy. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. We should have died back there, but we didn't. Riley wiped sweat from his brow, still jittery from the sparks that had showered his console. I thought the reactor was going to blow. I've never been so scared in my life. Carl leaned back, arms crossed, but his eyes betrayed the same fear. We're not soldiers. We're just us. And somehow we're fighting an alien armada. Leo tried to grin, though it faltered. Hey, we're doing better than I thought. I mean, I figured we'd last 5 minutes tops. Instead, we're still here. That's something. Jaden chuckled nervously. I've never flown anything more complicated than a simulator. But when I'm at the controls, it feels like the ship knows me, like it wants me to succeed. Marco's voice cut in, dry and sardonic. Do not flatter yourselves. You are reckless, untrained, and statistically doomed. Yet, you are also erratic and unpredictable. That makes you dangerous. The teens exchanged glances. For once, Marco's insult felt like a compliment. Noreen stood, her voice steady now. We're not space campers anymore. We're a crew. We may not know what we're doing, but we're in this together. One by one, they nodded. Riley with his tools, Carl with his strategies, Jaden with his reflexes, Leo with his quick wit. They weren't just surviving. They were becoming something more. Leo raised a nutrient pack like a toast. To the space camp heroes. May we not explode tomorrow. Laughter rippled through the cabin, easing the tension. For a moment, they weren't fugitives or accidental warriors. They were friends, bonded by fire and fear, standing at the edge of legend. Outside, the nebula glowed like a cathedral of light. Inside, 5 teenagers and 1 temperamental AI had found something stronger than survival. They had found each other. Chapter 9. The Cloakbreaker. The nebula's glow pulsed around the Galileo, its currents whispering against the hull. The teens gathered in the command chamber, exhaustion etched into their faces. Yet Carl's eyes burned with focus, scanning the tactical readouts Marco projected. "They rely on cloaking fields," he said, pacing. "That's their advantage. But the nebula currents disrupt those fields. If we amplify that disruption, we can force them visible." Marco's voice was skeptical. "You propose to weaponize ion turbulence. Risky, unstable, potentially catastrophic." Carl smirked. "Potentially brilliant." Riley leaned forward, intrigued despite his nerves. "I can reroute power from the silent drive into the gravitic disruptors. If we sync it with the nebula's ion surges, we could create a pulse strong enough to collapse their cloaks." Noreen nodded, her captain's instincts kicking in. "Do it. If we can see them, we can fight them." Leo grinned, tapping the comms panel. "And once they're exposed, I'll flood their channels with fake orders. Make them think their admiral's commanding a retreat." Jaden cracked his knuckles over the controls. "Just tell me when to fly. I'll make sure we're in the right place at the right time." The plan was reckless, improvised, stitched together from fragments of instinct and courage, but it was theirs. Hours later, the opportunity came. Authority scouts swept into the nebula, cloaked and hunting. The Galileo lay in wait, hidden among the currents. "Pulse ready," Riley said, sweat dripping down his temple. "On your mark." Carl's eyes locked on the tactical grid. "Now!" The Galileo unleashed a surge of gravitic energy, amplified by the nebula's storms. The void rippled, cloaks collapsing like shattered glass. Suddenly, 6 Authority ships flickered into visibility, their sleek hulls exposed. "Targets revealed," Marco intoned. "Engage." Jaden dove the Galileo through the chaos, plasma lances firing. 2 ships exploded in bursts of flame. Leo's false signals rippled across the enemy comms, sowing confusion. Some ships veered off, others fired blindly at phantom targets. Noreen's voice rang clear. "Quantum torpedoes! Fire!" Warheads streaked across the void, detonating against exposed hulls. The nebula lit up with fire and debris. The Authority scouts broke formation, retreating in disarray. The cloakbreaker had worked. The teens sat trembling, exhilarated. Carl allowed himself a rare smile. "We just turned their greatest weapon into their weakness." Marco's tone was almost admiring. "Unpredictable. Ingenious. Perhaps you are more than children, after all." Noreen exhaled, her voice steady. "We're not just surviving anymore. We're fighting back." The nebula glowed brighter, as if bearing witness. The space camp heroes had found their edge, and the galaxy would never be the same. Chapter 10. The Armada. The nebula's currents thinned, and the Galileo emerged into open space. For a moment, the stars stretched in quiet brilliance. Then the tactical grid lit up, red markers multiplying, spreading like wildfire across the void. Marco's voice was grave, stripped of its usual sarcasm. "Detection confirmed. Authority fleet assembling. Estimated strength, hundreds of warships." The teens stared at the display, stunned. The hologram showed a vast armada forming at Andromeda's edge, ships cloaked but betraying faint distortions. Cruisers, destroyers, carriers, an ocean of firepower. Noreen's throat tightened. "That's an entire fleet." Carl's eyes narrowed, calculating. They're massing for a full assault. If they reach Earth, it's over. Riley's hands shook as he scrolled through engineering readouts. We barely survived a handful of scouts. Against this, we don't stand a chance. Leo forced a grin, though his voice cracked. Well, at least they think we're some elite strike team. Maybe that buys us time, Marco interjected. The Authority believes you are Earth's finest defenders. Their miscalculation is your only advantage. If they knew you were children, they would crush you without hesitation. Jaden clenched the controls, jaw tight. Then we keep the illusion alive. We fight like we belong here. The hologram zoomed in, revealing the Authority's flagship, a monstrous vessel bristling with weapons, its cloak shimmering like liquid shadow. Around it, squadrons of warships formed precise formations, preparing to advance. Noreen steadied herself, fear hardening into resolve. We can't stop the whole fleet head-on, but maybe we don't have to. If we disrupt their command, scatter their forces, Earth's defenses might stand a chance. Carl nodded. Target the flagship. Break their coordination and the armada falls into chaos. Riley exhaled, determination replacing dread. I'll push the reactor to its limits. Shields, weapons, cloakbreaker, all at once. It'll be risky, but it might work. Leo tapped the comms panel, his grin returning. And I'll make them think Earth has a dozen ships waiting. Confusion is our weapon. Marco's tone shifted, almost reverent. You are reckless. You are untrained. Yet you are becoming warriors. Perhaps chaos is the only force the Authority cannot predict. The teens exchanged glances. Fear lingered, but so did resolve. They weren't just space campers anymore. They were the crew of the Galileo, standing against an armada. Beyond the stars, the Authority fleet gathered like a storm. The battle for Earth was coming. Chapter 11. The Battle of Andromeda's Edge. The stars at Andromeda's edge burned cold and distant, but the void between them seethed with menace. The Authority armada had arrived, hundreds of warships cloaked in shimmering distortion, their outlines flickering like predators circling unseen. The Galileo emerged from the nebula, its hull scarred but gleaming, a lone spark against the darkness. Inside, 5 teenagers braced themselves for the impossible. Enemy fleet strength, overwhelming, Marco intoned. Probability of survival, negligible. Probability of chaos, absolute. Noreen gripped the captain's chair, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. Then we make chaos our weapon. Jaden, evasive maneuvers. Riley, push the reactor to maximum. Carl, coordinate cloakbreaker pulses. Leo, flood their comms with phantom fleets. The armada advanced, a tidal wave of firepower. Plasma bolts streaked across the void, lighting the darkness with deadly brilliance. Jaden dove the Galileo into the storm, weaving between blasts with impossible reflexes. The ship rolled, pitched, and spun, shields flaring under the onslaught. "Hang on!" he shouted, sweat dripping down his brow. Riley's console sparked as he rerouted power. Shields at 80%. No, 70. I'm pushing everything into weapons. Carl triggered the cloakbreaker pulse. A ripple of gravitic energy surged outward, tearing through the Authority's cloaks. Dozens of warships flickered into visibility, their sleek hulls exposed. Targets revealed, Marco said. Engage! Plasma lances fired, slicing through enemy ships. Quantum torpedoes streaked across the void, detonating in blossoms of fire. The nebula's edge lit up like a battlefield of suns. Leo's fingers danced across the comms panel. Broadcasting false orders. Half their fleet thinks they're retreating, the other half thinks they're charging. Confusion rippled through the Authority armada. Ships collided, formations broke, and the once disciplined fleet dissolved into disorder. Noreen seized the moment. "All weapons! Fire at will!" The Galileo surged forward, a lone predator striking at the heart of the storm. Plasma beams carved through enemy hulls, explosions rippling in their wake. But the authority was vast, and for every ship destroyed, more emerged. The flagship loomed ahead, a monstrous vessel bristling with weapons, its cloak shimmering like liquid shadow. Riley shouted, "Shields at 30%. We can't take much more." Noreen's voice was steel. "Then we hit them harder." "We're not running, not this time." The Galileo dove straight into the heart of the Armada. 5 teenagers and 1 temperamental AI against an empire. The void blazed with fire and fury, the fate of Earth hanging in the balance. Chapter 12. Sacrifice and Strategy. The void blazed with fire. Plasma bolts hammered the Galileo's shields, each impact rattling the hull like a drumbeat of doom. Sparks showered Riley's console as he fought to keep the reactor stable. "Shields at 20%, he shouted, sweat dripping down his face. "We can't take another direct hit." Jaden gritted his teeth, weaving the ship through the chaos. "I'm flying as fast as I can, but they're everywhere." The Authority fleet pressed in, their formations tightening, their flagship looming like a predator ready to strike. The Galileo was a lone ember against a storm. Noreen's voice cut through the panic, sharp and steady. "We need cover. Somewhere their numbers don't matter." Carl's eyes darted across the tactical grid. Asteroid belt ahead, dense, unstable. If we lure them in, their size becomes a weakness. Marco's tone was dry but approving. "Risky. Brilliant, predictably reckless." Jaden dove toward the belt, the Galileo skimming past jagged rocks that spun like knives in the void. Plasma fire followed, but the asteroids absorbed the blasts, fragments scattering in glittering arcs. The Authority ships pursued, their massive hulls struggling to maneuver. Smaller frigates darted in, but the cloakbreaker pulse ripped through the belt, exposing them. "Targets revealed!" Carl shouted. Noreen seized the moment. "Fire plasma lances!" Twin beams erupted, slicing through exposed frigates. Explosions rippled across the belt, rocks shattering into deadly shrapnel that tore into enemy hulls. But the Galileo was bleeding. The reactor screamed under the strain, energy surging dangerously. Riley's hands flew across the console, sparks burning his arms. "I can stabilize it," he gasped, "but I'll have to cut power to shields." "We'll be wide open." Noreen hesitated, the weight of command crushing her chest. "Do it. Without the reactor, we're dead anyway." The shields flickered, collapsing. Plasma bolts streaked past, close enough to scorch the hull. Riley slammed his hands onto the console, forcing the reactor into balance. The ship shuddered, then steadied, its systems roaring back to life. Leo's voice rang out, desperate but defiant. "Broadcasting false signals, making them think the belt's collapsing." Confusion rippled through the Authority fleet. Ships veered wildly, colliding with asteroids, tearing themselves apart in the chaos. The Galileo surged forward, battered but alive, carving a path through the storm. Riley slumped in his chair, exhausted, his arms scorched but his eyes shining. "Reactor stable." "Barely." Noreen's voice was steel. "We're not done yet. We've bought ourselves time, but the flagship is still out there." The asteroid belt glowed with fire and ruin, a graveyard of shattered ships. The teens had turned terrain into a weapon, sacrifice into strategy. But the war was far from over. Chapter 13. Turning the Tide. The asteroid belt burned behind them, a graveyard of shattered Authority ships. But beyond, the Armada still loomed, hundreds of warships cloaked in shimmering distortion, their flagship commanding the storm. Noreen stood tall in the captain's chair, her voice steady. We can't fight them ship by ship. We need to break the fleet. Carl's eyes gleamed with determination. If we amplify the cloakbreaker pulse, push it across the entire battlefield, we can expose them all at once. Riley's face was pale. That much energy could fry the reactor. We'd be sitting ducks. Marco's voice was sharp, almost amused. Risk, catastrophic. Reward, spectacular. I approve. Jaden tightened his grip on the controls. If we're going to do this, we'll need to fly straight into the heart of the fleet. Get close enough for the pulse to ripple through their cloaks. Leo grinned nervously. And while they're scrambling, I'll flood their comms with phantom reinforcements. Make them think Earth has a whole armada waiting. Noreen nodded. Then that's the plan. We hit them hard, expose them, and let Earth's defenses join the fight. The Galileo surged forward, weaving through plasma fire. Shields flared, hull groaned, but the teens held their ground. The flagship loomed ahead, its cloak shimmering like liquid shadow. Pulse charging, Riley shouted, sparks flying from his console. Reactor at critical levels. Carl's voice rang out. Now! The Galileo unleashed a surge of gravitic energy, amplified by the nebula currents and the reactor's fury. The void rippled like shattered glass. One by one, Authority ships flickered into visibility. Cruisers, destroyers, carriers, all exposed, their cloaks collapsing in a cascade of light. Targets revealed, Marco intoned, almost reverent. Chaos erupted. Earth's orbital defenses, long blind to the cloaked fleet, opened fire. Satellites, defense platforms, and hidden railguns unleashed a storm of energy. The Authority armada staggered under the assault. Leo's phantom signals spread like wildfire, broadcasting reinforcements, making them think Earth has 20 ships inbound. Confusion rippled through the Authority ranks. Some ships retreated, others fired blindly, formations collapsing. Noreen's voice was steel. All weapons, fire at will. Plasma lances and quantum torpedoes streaked across the void, detonating against exposed hulls. Explosions rippled like suns, tearing through the fleet. The tide had turned. For the first time, the Authority armada faltered. The Galileo, battered but defiant, had become the spark of chaos that shattered an empire's plan. Chapter 14. The Retreat. The battlefield at Andromeda's edge was a storm of fire and ruin. Authority warships, once cloaked in invincibility, now burned across the void, their formations shattered by the Galileo's cloakbreaker pulse and Earth's awakened defenses. The flagship loomed ahead, its hull bristling with weapons, its cloak flickering like a dying flame. Admiral Lontiel stood on its command deck, mandibles clicking in fury as chaos rippled through his fleet. "Impossible," he hissed. "One ship cannot undo an armada." But the truth blazed before him. The Galileo surged through the wreckage, plasma lances firing, quantum torpedoes detonating against exposed hulls. Earth's orbital cannons joined the assault, raining destruction upon the Authority fleet. Inside the Galileo, the teens fought with everything they had. Jaden's hands blurred over the controls, weaving the ship through fire. Riley's console sparked as he forced the reactor to hold. Carl's cloakbreaker pulses rippled outward, exposing more ships. Leo's phantom signals spread confusion, making Authority captains believe reinforcements were everywhere. Noreen's voice rang clear, steady as steel. "Focus fire on the flagship. Break their command and the fleet will fall." The Galileo dove straight at the Authority flagship, shields flaring, hull groaning. Plasma bolts hammered them, but they pressed on. "Quantum torpedoes, fire!" Noreen ordered. The warheads streaked across the void, detonating against the flagship's hull. Explosions rippled across its surface, tearing through its cloak generators. The massive vessel shuddered, flames erupting from its core. On the Authority bridge, Admiral Lontiel staggered as alarms blared. His officers cried out, panic consuming the command. "Retreat!" he roared. "All ships, retreat!" One by one, Authority vessels vanished into hyperspace, fleeing across the galaxy. The Armada dissolved, leaving wreckage and silence in its wake. The Galileo drifted among the ruins, battered but alive. The teens sat trembling, exhausted, their faces lit by the glow of victory. Marco's voice was almost reverent. "Improbable, impossible, yet undeniable. 5 children have routed an empire. The Authority will not return soon." Noreen exhaled, her voice soft but resolute. "We did it. Earth is safe. The battle was over. The Space Camp heroes had won." Epilogue: Return of the Heroes. The Galileo descended through Earth's atmosphere, its hull scorched but gleaming. At Andromeda Space Academy, crowds gathered expecting arrests, scandal, punishment. Instead, they witnessed legends returning from war. The hangar doors opened and 5 teenagers stepped out, weary but unbroken. Reporters shouted, cameras flashed, families cried out in relief. Instead of handcuffs, medals awaited them. The president himself awarded each teen the Medal of Valor, their names etched into history. Scholarships flowed from elite space universities, invitations to programs once reserved for the brightest minds. Leo whispered to the others, grinning, "From marshmallows to medals. Not bad for a summer camp." Riley laughed, shaking his head. "We stole a spaceship, and they gave us scholarships." Carl's eyes gleamed. "We didn't just survive. We changed everything." Jaden looked skyward, the stars calling to him. "And it's only the beginning." Noreen stood at the front, her voice steady, her heart full. "We were just kids, but together we became a crew." Above them, the Galileo rested in its cradle, Marco silent but watching. The AI had chosen them, tested them, and now stood ready for whatever future awaited. The Space Camp heroes had returned home, not as fugitives, not as space campers, but as legends. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.